Hello, and welcome to the Terrible Tragedies in Time podcast, where we dive into chilling tales of times past. We discuss topics from serial killers to natural disasters. Our goal is to dive deep and answer the questions that others have. If gruesome and horrifying facts are too much to bear, this podcast may not be for you. Today's trigger warning is death.
All right. I'm bringing us our wonderful little topic this week. I'm gonna talk about the Highstown rail accident, which is one of the first rail accidents that have occurred in the U.S. after we switched from horse-drawn carriages to powered railways. This happened on November 8th, 1833. Happened in Canberra, I think I said that right, New Jersey, United States, on the Amboy and Bordentown lines. It did end up causing a derailed train due to this accident.
So, what specifically caused the accident?
So what caused this accident was it hotboxed, and in the terms of rail cars, hotboxing is when the journal box overheats, causing the axle and bearings to break.
Got you. And then what specifically is a hot box, you said?
The hot box is the journal box overheating. So a journal box is the boxing unit on the underside of the rail cart that houses the journal bearings. And the journal bearings are a bunch of rollers and a block of metal, usually brass or brawn, that use it to hold to load the rest. In car constructions, the terms aren't really used, but it's basically like the car axle journal bearings. If you know what those are, it's just where it houses all of the turning pieces and whatnot.
Gotcha. And then you said there was a derailment. What kind of injuries did people sustain on that?
So, the derailment, surprisingly enough, only resulted in one death. But there were 24 passengers that actually got injured from it. In fact, some of them are really well known. We had Cornelius Vanderbilt, which you probably heard throughout school. Another one was former President John Quincy Adams. And then there was an actor, Tyrone Power, I believe is how his name said. He was an Irish actor, all on this train at the day on that day.
That's crazy. Are there any firsthand accounts from any of those people recorded?
Yeah, so Cornelius Vanderbilt himself said that it was a really bad tragedy. He actually had a broken leg from this accident, and due to it vowed that he would never use train transportation again, which is funny because I don't know if you remember in school when you learned about him and the other magnates of the U.S., he is the railroad magnate. So he ended up breaking his vow later on in life to establish our railway systems the way they are today. He ended up owning the New York Central Railroad and many others. And I find that amusing because he, again, vowed to never use train transportation. He was like, but what if I make it better?
Right. So he owned some of the railways. Did he ever use his own railways after he owned them?
I don't recall hearing about that, but I believe he ended up, from what I remember in school, did end up using some of his systems.
Okay. I mean, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Making sure they're safe and stuff. Yeah, I'll get on it now.
Yeah, I made it. It's better. It's safe for me. It'll be fine. Another one of our famous people that were on there, John Quincy Adams, in his journal described the event as the most dreadful catastrophe that ever my eyes beheld, was his exact wording. Basically saying that out of all the things he's seen in his life, again, being the president of the United States, he's like, this is definitely the most tragic thing I had seen.
That's insane.
Yeah.
Was this one of the very first ever passenger trains?
From what I can read, it's at least one of the first passenger trains that were automated. They still had, their train conductor, but they weren't using horse-drawn stuff at this point. In fact, that switching from horse-drawn to the train that this one was, and I believe it was a coal-powered train, only happened 2 months prior to this accident. So this was a fairly new accident in the railroad system, trading over. It was the first listed one for that kind of accident after the switchover.
Now, it was the hot box and the journey box or whatever that caused the issue. Did they have the technology back then to have avoided the accident entirely?
So they did. So the journal box, they registered it was overheating. They actually, I believe it said like 20 minutes prior, they had stopped and oiled the journal box, which is supposed to prevent it from overheating because it overheats due to the friction. And so they stopped prior to oil it, and then they continued going. Before they stopped, they were doing about 35 miles per hour, and after they stopped, to try to prevent it from continuing to get worse, they actually dropped down to 20 miles per hour for the track. And then I think it was like 20 minutes or something like that later, the journal box actually broke, which is what caused the derailment.
Gotcha. And then after the accident happened, did they put any safety measures in place to avoid a repeat of the accident?
I don't believe so, because I do believe that they did everything that they were able to in that time with what materials and tools that they had to prevent it from happening. There was nothing that they could have done to stop it. The most they can do in a time like that was just oil it and keep going. Because by the time they realized it, with it being derailed, I'm going to assume the damage to the axle had already been done, and just the extra wear on it had caused it to break. They couldn't stop to get it fixed at a stop point or a train station. They couldn't switch passengers off to a different train because they were in the middle of the line. The nearest train station was Highstown. They were going from I believe they were going from the Amboy station down to Highstown. And so the nearest one to them at that point with the direction they were traveling was Highstown, which was another 20 or 30 miles, if I'm not mistaken, from where the derailment actually happened. Yeah, there's sadly not a lot of information on this this tragedy, which is honestly baffling due to how many famous people were on it. I mean, Cornelius Vanderbilt and President Adams both being on this, and there's nothing really about it. I went through multiple different websites and different books and whatnot to find information on this, and it was all the same information, repeat information from Wikipedia to the encyclopedias to the New York Rail and something association. They have an entire page on it, but it's the same information you're going to find on Wikipedia. There's almost nothing about it.
That's insane.
Yeah.
Do you think that's just what time period it was in, probably, or?
I think part of it was the time period it was in. It was 1833, so this is like really early into the U.S. history. I mean, John Adams, he was our second president, right? Because it was, I think it was like
so bad with presidents.
I believe it was, according to the musical Hamilton, which is where I get all of my early U.S. history, it was Washington, Adams, Jefferson, Madison. So I think Adams is the second one. So, this is super early into U.S. history that there just wasn't a lot of information obtained. I mean, we had newspapers then, but with where it was and, we only had the 13 colonies and starting to expand and grow at that time, that it wasn't a big thing. I mean, it was a railway accident that, happened only 2 months after they switched from horse-drawn stuff to these, and
I wonder if they tried to kind of push it under the rug.
Maybe.
They didn't want it to fail.
Maybe.
They didn't want people to be scared of the system.
Yeah. Which I think is part of the reason why Cornelius Vanderbilt himself had decided he was going to go and make them better. Even though, like I said earlier, taking that vow to never use the transportation systems again, I think part of his reasoning was like, well, this did happen to me. This is tragic. I'm going to make it safe. And he is our founding father of the United States for our railroad system. He is one of the magnates. And, Vanderbilt, you hear him as early as third grade. That's when I heard of him first, was when we were talking about, U.S. history, hearing all of the magnates' name. His name first came up then. And then, you learn more throughout school, and so it's really surprising to see that and actually think that, this early accident in 1833 led to what we have today for our train system, which is more obsolete. We don't use it for passengers very often anymore, unlike, a lot of other countries. U.S. is very, railroad systems are just for our product transportation, but we also have, cars, buses.
Admittedly, I went to a lot of Department of Defense schools growing up. So in the third grade, I went to school on base. So a lot of our curriculum was actually geared for like history, toward natives in Alaska, like the indigenous people of Alaska.
Okay.
So I didn't learn a whole lot about the rail systems in third grade.
Interesting. It's kind of interesting to hear. I learned way too much about Martin Luther King Jr. in elementary school because I went to a school named after him. So I didn't learn too much about it. We just kind of like touched on it and went past. I ended up actually learning a lot more about it in high school. And then when I went to college, I have been very big on early U.S. history. I only go from settlement to just after Civil War. So I get like that really early U.S. history block. And that's where I learned more about Cornelius Vanderbilt and our other magnates in the system. And that's where I actually learned about, John Quincy Adams and what he did and all that stuff. But interesting enough, even in that, I didn't hear about this railway accident, which was kind of an important part of some of the things that happened. I mean, our railway systems, a president was on that. You would think if a president was on it, we'd hear more about it. I mean, we hear all about the, currently it's about the Trump attempted assassination. We hear all about, Lincoln and his assassination and all of that stuff. Big important things that have happened to our president. We hear about Roosevelt being in the war and all of that stuff, but we hear nothing about, Washington, Adams, Jefferson, Madison. We don't know anything that happened to them in their life because we don't get told about it. Which brings back to that point you made. It's like, was it that time period? Because they didn't share a lot? Or what happened?
Yeah. There's no telling. Because I feel like a lot of history, like the further back you go, the more it gets lost in time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Unless it's big events, like Jack the Ripper or the Great Fire of London and stuff like that. It gets lost. Stuff that's highly reported is all over everywhere. But the stuff like that, where it's like middle of nowhere, we don't know what happened, you don't have like any information, and it's baffling because there's so much stuff in history that we'll never know because of it.
Yeah, I've got to look into a few more like very obscure things because I think they definitely need to be touched on more.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. But there's just some things where you can only get certain amount of information, especially like this. I mean, I only have like 15 things that were really talked about in all of them, and only each website I had only had like one new thing after I got base information off of the railway website from New York. That it's just like I don't know what to do with this because there's nothing here. No matter how far I dived in, I actually went in and read John Quincy Adams' entry that they have on I forget which museum, but one of the museums has them actually PDF'd into their website. It's kind of like a digital museum. And I actually went through and read it, which is a task in its own. Because not only is it in cursive, it's in Old English. So you're now trying to transfer through everything. I don't think it was Smithsonian. And if it was, I think it's behind a paywall on Smithsonian. Because I think Smithsonian has a paywall for stuff like that.
Fair enough. Because that just sounds like something that they would have.
It absolutely does. It absolutely does.
Yeah.
But yeah, I went through and read that entire journal entry for that, and The only real outstanding factor was him stating that that is one of the worst tragedies his eyes had beheld. And that's all
crazy.
he really talked about it.
Imagine the tragedies he'd see today.
Right? I mean, this happened today, it'd be all over the news. Everyone would be talking about it because, one, there's, I believe at the time he was some form of political figure, if not was the president. Just because of the time period, I don't remember actually when he was president. But he, was very important. I mean, he became the president. He had to be an important person in society. And it just kind of got, brushed under the rug. But in today's society, any kind of political figure, whether it be actual politician or somebody that just gives a lot of, news and information out, they're all over the news if something happens to them. I mean, as of recently, we have TikTok now. You hear everything on TikTok before you even see it on the news systems.
Immediately, yep. And that's just, speed of information now is it's instantaneous. So everything happens, and everyone knows immediately. There's no such thing as, an accident being a secret.
Yeah, so that accident would have happened after John Adams was president, because he was president from 1797 to 1801. So this happened 20 years, basically, after his, 30 years after his presidency. So
they just
now this is this is a former president that this just happened to, and we're just like, who cares?
You know what? I get it.
I mean,
think about presidents we had about 30 years ago. I'd be like, who cares?
Right? I mean,
but at the same time, rail accidents now, trains are much faster. They hold more people.
Oh, yeah.
The horror and war that would happen would be far more substantial than what happened then.
So many train accidents that have happened in more recent times that I definitely want to talk about in future ones, because I find them, as, again, gory as this is going to sound, I find them very intriguing. I love hearing stuff about these man-made tragedies, basically, just faults in humankind. And a lot of them are that. There's a lot of train accidents in more modern times. There's some from the 70s, 80s, and 90s that what happened was just human error. It was human error. It was human negligence. And all it took was that person paying attention for 5 seconds. There was one that I've listened to on YouTube recently where the train conductor had just looked down at his phone to respond to a text to his wife and missed a signal, which caused him to keep the train going the same speed it was, where the signal told him to slow down. I'm going to say it's kilometers, 20 kilometers per hour because of where this was located. And he missed that signal, causing the train to derail because it went around a curve too sharp, causing it to tip off the track. So a lot of stuff now, they're tragic things that are just human error, but back then, there was nothing they could have done for that. I mean, this is one of the first trains on the tracks that weren't powered by, horses. So, there's only so much they could have done, and no matter how much you want to blame human error of, they could have checked it before they left, or, they could have done this, that, or anything, when they noticed it, they did what they could. They put oil on it, and at the time, that's all they could do.
For sure. Well, I think those are all the questions I have.
Yeah, I wish I had more, but this is definitely one of those topics where there's not much to talk about on it, because there's just not much there. And I'd love if I could find more information. Maybe if I do find more information someday, we can come back and touch on it some more, but that's what I got for now.
Fucking that's all, folks.